It's that time of the month. I don't mean like that time of the month, I mean it's the time of the month where I do my Kindle Unlimited recommendations video. So today we're going to be talking about my favorite enemies to lovers romances available on Kindle Unlimited. I will say, I think last time people got confused on Kindle Unlimited. Just because books are available on Kindle Unlimited does not mean that A, they always stay on Kindle Unlimited, or B, that you cannot purchase them if you don't have a subscription to Kindle Unlimited. Basically, Kindle Unlimited just makes things like free to read, if you will, but you can still purchase these books if you don't have the subscription service. So without further ado, let's get into my favorite enemies to lovers romances available on Kindle Unlimited. So the first one is Vicious by L.J. Shen. Before you click off of this video, there will be recommendations that you have probably never heard of, so bear with me. So this book is about Amelia and Vicious, and it is a story that is told from two different time periods, or timelines, if you will. We get modern day Vicious and Amelia, who have been brought back together under kind of shitty circumstances. In Amelia's case, she ends up working for Vicious, and then we get flashbacks to high school and their interactions and their sort of like enemies situation and how they became enemies. Amelia ended up dating one of Vicious's friends. Vicious kind of always lusted after her, but they both kind of hate each other, so there's sort of that like unrequited love pining element as well as the enemies to lover situation. I think the dual timelines was done really well in this book. I oftentimes don't like dual timelines in books, but this worked really well. I also think that Vicious is one of those characters who is so distinctive in new adult books. I think there aren't very many male heroines I can think of off the top of my head that do that kind of like bully aspect, but also bring in the bougie, aloof, bad boy vibe, which is like my favorite kind of bully, you know? Like, I don't want some teenage dirtbag in a 90s Mustang. Like, I want a guy driving a Porsche bullying me. I don't know what that says about me, but that's just my preference. I will say Vicious is a book that I recommend only to people who really like bully romances or typical new adult romances. This is not something to start out in if you really enjoyed traditionally published romances like The Unhoneymooners or rom-coms like that. This is definitely not a romantic comedy, and there are some problematic elements, I guess you could say, within the story. Usually not issues of consent, but more like, you know, bullying. So if you don't like that sort of thing, that kind of sounds not up your alley, this is not the book for you, but the next one probably will be. In that book is Scorpio Hates Virgo by Anita Sunday. This is part of her Science of Love series, and it is the one book in the series that is sort of an enemies to lovers situation, but it is a lot lighter hearted of an enemies to lovers situation than a lot of the other books that I'm going to mention. So this is a male-male romance that follows Percy and Cal as they sort of reunite after kind of a childhood rivalry. They both end up either moving back, or one of them moves back into their childhood homes that are right next to each other, and you get to see kind of their witty banter and a little bit of like a flashback into their previous tension and their like childhood fighting and rivalry. It's very cute, and it still has that sort of angst from the enemies to lovers. You're wondering like, why won't you guys just get over it and get together, because it's so clear you would work well together. But I like this because it, like I said, is very lighthearted and fun, and there are some slightly more serious topics handled. I believe one of the guys has a bad relationship with his family, or they aren't accepting of the fact that he is gay, but overall it is a pretty lighthearted story. I also really liked this particular book in the series because I think it does a really good job at fighting harmful stereotypes in the gay community, and in general I think this is a very good book to read because I don't believe that it fetishizes male-male relationships. If you're looking to kind of diversify your romance reading, you want to get into female-female or male-male, I think this is a really good place to start. Even though it's not own voices, it is not problematic, so that's always really cool. This next book, if you thought Vicious was a little bit out there, this one is a masterpiece of fuck-up-ness, and I don't give a good goddamn if it's problematic. So the story is about Misha and Ryan, and they have been pen pals since elementary school. They're now in high school, but they've been writing to each other since elementary school, and they both know each other's first names, they know each other's deepest, darkest secrets, but they don't know their last names. They don't know where their respective pen pal lives, and they have agreed to not try to look each other up on Facebook or any sort of social media. So this friendship sort of exists in a vacuum, which I think is super interesting and a different spin on a lot of new adult romances. And things sort of come to a head when Misha and Ryan meet at a high school party. I think one of them is aware of the other's identity, but the other person is not. Eventually, they both become aware of who the other person is, and we get to see them grapple with the fact that they know each other really intensely and know each other's deepest, darkest desires, but they don't know the facade that each other puts out into the world. So they end up really, really not liking each other through the majority of this book because they end up putting on this fake facade when they're out in the real world and are not fully showing the world who exactly they are. I think there's definitely some like stereotypes that come into play, but I think a lot of those are questioned and fought against. The whole like mean girl cheerleader stereotype thing is definitely something that comes up. And as a cheerleader in high school, I thought that was like a fun thing to explore. I'm also not someone who's super into like hyper specific tropes, but pen pals just really does it for me. I think the idea that you get to know someone kind of without knowing their whole story, seeing what someone's withholding is interesting, and also the idea that you can kind of build in past history between two characters through a pen pal situation without having to resort to flashbacks is pretty cool to me. And as compared to a lot of Penelope Douglas's other bully romances, in this one it is more than just the romance. I feel like there is kind of like a lesson to be learned, which I found it more compelling as a result, and it didn't feel like just your typical bully romance, if you will. This is one that I definitely recommend to late high school through college aged people. I think it helps you learn a lot about self-image and kind of the facade you're putting out into the world, and I don't know, I just really like this one. To me, this has a very special place in my heart. I stayed up reading this book for the first time at 3 a.m. and I can't wait to reread it soon because I wanted to put enough like a distance between myself reading it for the first time and reading it for the second time, but I don't know, I'm really excited to re-explore this one because it is just one of my favorite books like ever. I'm really excited to recommend this book because I'm finally getting to talk about my plague daddy, Pestilence. So the book I'm talking about is Pestilence by Laura Thalassa. This book starts with a firefighter named Sarah literally drawing the short end of the stick and being charged with fighting one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The world is ending and Pestilence is spreading his plague around the world. So Sarah knows that Pestilence is in her town. I believe this is set in Canada, and she ends up having to shoot him. Unfortunately, Pestilence is immortal and is not so happy about being shot in his washboard abs. So the story kind of follows Pestilence and Sarah as Pestilence kind of kidnaps her and takes her across the world as he is spreading his plague. I like this one because this is a true enemies to lover situation. I mean, if someone was trying to end the human race, I believe we would probably be enemies. And on top of that, the book starts with both of them doing pretty equally fucked up things to each other. At the beginning, I believe, you know, Sarah shoots him, and then Pestilence kind of drags her behind a horse, as in she has to walk behind a horse for like days without resting. So they definitely start with a true enemy situation. So if you're not into kind of like gruesome enemies to lovers, this probably isn't for you. If you like kind of like historical fiction or kind of like slower moving plots, this is probably for you because the character development through the story is so fun. I also really like the fact that Sarah is someone who reminds me a lot of other paranormal or urban fantasy heroines. She's got a lot of spirit, a lot of zest, and she doesn't just like take shit laying down, which I really loved, and it made this story a lot more interesting. I also like that Pestilence is sort of like old-fashioned and like doesn't really understand the world that he is trying to destroy. It makes for a more entertaining and like fun story than just, oh wow, shit, the world's ending. And overall, it was just a really fun read. It is a little bit on the long side, like I said, but I think this one is really good for people who are kind of on the fence about smutty reads, but they kind of like a paranormal or a fantasy and are kind of wanting to branch into romance. There's a lot of witty banter. It's really fun. There are some kind of heartwarming moments, and I think there are a couple of sex scenes. It's pretty tame, but it is definitely a fun romance to get into, so I definitely recommend it. I'm going to be reading War this month for my monthly book club, so you guys can see my opinions on the sequel, but this first one I would highly, highly recommend. The last book that I have to recommend to you guys today is Filthy Gods by R. Scarlett. This is what I consider to be a classic romance with a bougie spin. So basically there is a gentleman's society at Yale, and our hero Gabriel is a part of it. Gabriel, over the years at Yale, I believe this is his and the heroine's junior year at Yale, they have been sort of battling it out, trying to get the best grades, and they kind of like argue and banter back and forth in class. Juliet, our heroine, is someone who comes from less money than Gabriel, doesn't have that like trust fund lifestyle, and one summer she decides that she is going to work as, I think, a maid at a local bougie hotel. Surprise, surprise, Gabriel's mother owns said hotel, and so she ends up kind of being his maid, his servant, if you will. There's sort of that like power struggle, but there's also the enemies aspect since they kind of battled it out in college. I like this one because it is very angsty and it is very steamy, but it's also incredibly well written. I don't think I've read a lot of books on this level in romance in a really long time. I will say it is a novella, so it is sort of short, but I don't think that that was a super big hindrance to the story. The only thing I would have liked to see a little bit more of is a little bit more tension and a little bit more flashbacks into their sort of enemies situation. But overall, I feel like this 150 page novella is a really cool setup for the rest of the series and a good sneak peek into this sort of like posh Yale society of gentlemen that we are going to learn more about in future books. I don't know when the first book in the series is coming out. I think our Scarlet might be putting a hold on this series as a whole, which is really depressing, but the novella is available on Kindle Unlimited and it is really fun and it's a really good short read and I really recommend it. So that is it. Those are all of my recommendations for enemies to lovers books on Kindle Unlimited. If you guys have any recommendations for other enemies to lovers books that you really love, please put them down in the comments below. Even better if they are available on Kindle Unlimited so we can just have this be a place for nice, smutty, free romances for everybody else. I'm going to leave a link in my description if you guys want to try out Kindle Unlimited for free for a month. I'm also going to leave a link in my description for a list of all the titles that I mentioned in this video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I love you so much, and until next time.